Hi everyone, welcome to today's story time. My name is Georgia and I'm a conversation starter at the yard. And yeah, I hope you guys had a really good weekend. So, football, my goodness, it was the first time that I'd watched a football match, I think, ever. And yeah, it was very explosive, very tense. But we'll be speaking about that more tomorrow and this week on Tea and Toast. So, yeah, we are reading Six of Crows, which is a book by Leigh Bardugo or Bardugo. I will at some point look it up and see how you pronounce her name. But she's the creator of the Netflix series Shadow and Bone and also of the Grishaverse, which is where this book and story lives. And yeah, so we are on chapter 6. If you didn't, well, if you hadn't catched any of our previous streams, you can find chapters 1 to 5 on Facebook, Twitch, and on YouTube. So if you have missed it, don't worry, because you can go back and listen to that stuff again. So yeah, let's get into it. The sick feeling in Nina's stomach had nothing to do with the rocking of the rowboat. She tried to breathe deeply, to focus on the lights of the Kesdam harbour disappearing behind them and the steady splash of the oars in the water. Beside her, Kaz adjusted his mask and cloak, while Muzzin rode with relentless and aggressive speed, driving them closer to Rengel, one of Kirch's tiny outlying islands, closer to Hellgate and Matthias. Fog laying low over the water, damp and curling. It carried the smell of tar and machinery from the shipyards on Imperium, and something else, the sweet stink of burning bodies from the reaper's barge, where Catsdam disposed of the dead who couldn't afford to be buried in the cemeteries outside the city. Disgusting, Nina thought, drawing her cloak tighter around her. Why would anyone want to live in a city like this was beyond her. Muzzin hummed happily as he rode. Nina knew him only in passing, a bouncer and an enforcer, like the ill-fated Bold Bollinger. She avoided the Slat and the Crow Club as much as possible. Kaz had branded her a snob for it, but she didn't much care what Kaz Brecker had to say about her tastes. She glanced back at Muzzin's large shoulders. She wondered if Kaz had brought him along to row, or because he expected trouble tonight. Of course there will be trouble. They were breaking into a prison. It wasn't going to be a party. So why were we dressed for one? She had met Kaz and Muzzin at Fifth Harbour at midnight, and when she'd boarded the little rowboat, Kaz had handed her a blue silk cape and a matching veil, the trappings of the lost bride, and one of the costumes pleasure seekers liked to don when they sampled the excesses of the barrel. He'd had on a big orange cape with a madman's mask perched on top of his head. Muzzin had worn the same. All they needed was a stage, and they could perform one of those dark, savage little scenes from the Commandery Brute and the Kirch that the Kirch seemed to find so hilarious. Now Kaz gave her a nudge. Lower your veil. He pulled down his own mask. The long nose and bulging eyes looked doubly monstrous in the fog. She was about to give in and ask why the costumes were necessary when she realised they weren't alone. Through the shifting mist, she caught sight of other boats moving through the water, carrying the shapes of other madmen, other brides, and Mr. Crimson, a scarab queen. What business did these people have at Hellgate? Kaz refused to tell her the specifics of his plan, and when she'd insisted, he'd simply say, "Get in the boat." That was Kaz all over. He knew he didn't have to tell her anything because the lure of Matthias's freedom had already overridden every bit of her good sense. She'd been trying to talk Kaz into breaking Matthias out of jail for the better part of a year. Now he could offer Matthias more than freedom, but the price would be far higher than she had expected. Only a few lights were visible as they approached the rocky shoal of Terrangel. The rest was darkness and crashing waves. "Couldn't you just bribe the warden?" she muttered to Kaz. "I don't need him knowing he has something that I want." When the boat's hull scraped sand, two men rushed forward to haul them further onto land. The other boats she'd seen were making ground in the same cove, being pulled ashore by more grunting and cursing men. Their features were vague through the gauze of her veil, But Nina had glimpsed the tattoos on their forearms, a feral cat curled into a crown, the symbol of the dying lions. "Many," one of them said as they clambered out of the boat. Kaz handed over a stack of Kruger, and once it was counted, the dying lion waved them on. They followed a row of torches up an uneven path to the leeward side of the prison. Nina tilted her head back to gaze at the high black towers of the fortress, known as Hellgate, a dark fist of stone thrusting up from the sea. She had seen it from afar before, when she'd paid a fisherman to take her out to the island. But when she'd asked him to bring her closer, he'd refused. "Sharks get mean here," he'd claimed. "Bellies full of convict blood." Nina shuddered at the memory. A door had been propped open, and another member of the Dime Lions led Nina and the others inside. They entered a dark, surprisingly clean kitchen, its walls lined with huge vats that looked better suited to a laundry than cooking. The room smelt strange, like vinegar and sage. Like a merchant's kitchen, Nina thought. The Kirch believed that work was akin to a prayer. Maybe the merchant wives came here to scrub the floors and walls and windows, to honour the Gazine, the god of industry and commerce, with soap and water and the chafing of their hands. Nina resisted the urge to gag. They could scrub all they liked. Beneath that wholesome scent was the indelible stench of mildew, urine, and unwashed bodies. It might take an actual miracle to dislodge it. They passed through a dank entry hall, and she thought that they would head up to the cells, but instead they passed through another door and onto a high stone walkway that connected the main prison to what looked like another tower. "Where are we going?" Nina whispered. Kaz didn't answer. The wind picked up, lifting her veil and lashing her cheeks with salt spray. As they entered the second tower, a figure emerged from the shadows, and Nina barely stifled a scream. "Inej," she said in a wavering breath. The silly girl wore the horns and high-necked tunic of the great imp, but Nina recognised her anyway. No one moved her like that, as if the world was smoke and she was just passing through it. "How did you even get here?" Nina whispered to her. "I came earlier on a supply barge." Nina ground her teeth. "Do people just come and go from Hellgate for fun?" "Once a week they do," said Inej, her little imp horns bobbing along with her head. "What do you mean once in a—" "Keep quiet," Kaz growled. "Don't shush me, Bracker," Nina whispered furiously. "If it's this easy to get into Hellgate, the problem isn't getting here, it's getting out. Now shut up and stay alert." Nina swallowed her anger. She had to trust Kaz to run this game. He'd made sure she didn't have any other choice. They entered a tight passageway. This tower felt different from the first, older, its rough-hewn stone walls blackened by smoking torches. Their Dime Lion guide pushed open a heavy iron door and gestured for them to follow him down a stone staircase. Here the smell of bodies and the refuse was worse, trapped by the sweating moisture of salt water. They spiraled lower into the bowels of the rock. Nina clung to the wall. There was no banister, and though she could not see the bottom, she doubted the fall would be kind. They didn't go far, but by the time they'd reached their destination, she was trembling. Her muscles wound taut, less from exertion than knowledge that Matthias was somewhere in this terrible place. "He is here. He is under this roof." "Where are we?" she whispered as they ducked through cramped stone tunnels, passing dark caves fitted with iron bars. "This is the old prison," Kaz said. When they built the new tower, they left this one standing." She heard moaning from inside one of the cells. "They still keep prisoners here." "Only the worst of them." She peered through the bars of an empty cell. There were shackles on the wall, dark with rust and what might have been blood. Through the walls, a sound reached Nina's ears, a steady pounding. She thought it was the ocean at first, but then she realised it was chanting. They emerged into a curving tunnel. To her right were more old cells. The light poured into the tunnel from staggered archways on the left, and through them she glimpsed a roaring, rowdy crowd. The Dying Lion led them around the tunnel to the third archway, where a prison guard dressed in a blue and grey uniform was posted, rifle slung across his back. 4 more for you, the Dime Lion shouted over to the crowd. Then he turned to Kaz. If you need to leave, the guard will call for an escort. No one goes wandering off without a guard. Understood? Of course, wouldn't dream of it, Kaz said from behind his ridiculous mask. Enjoy, the Dime Lion said with an ugly grin. The prison guard waved them through. Nina stepped under the arch and felt as though she'd fallen into some strange nightmare. They were on a jutting stone ledge, looking out into a shallow, crudely made amphitheatre. The tower had been gutted to create an arena. Only the black walls of the old prison remained, the roof long since fallen in or destroyed so that the night sky was visible high above, dense with clouds and free of stars. It was like standing in the hollowed-out trunk of a massive tree, something long dead and howling with echoes. Around her, masked and veiled men and women crowded onto the terrace ledges, stamping their feet as the action proceeded below. The walls surrounding the fighting pit blazed with torchlight, and the sand of the arena floor was red and damp where it had soaked up blood. In front of the dark mouth of the cave, a scrawny, bearded man in shackles stood next to a big wooden wheel marked with what looked like drawings of little animals. He'd clearly once been strong, but now his skin hung in loose folds and his muscles sagged. A younger man stood beside him in a mangy cape made from lion skin, his face framed by the big cat's mouth. A garish gold crown had been secured between the lion's ears, and its eyes had been replaced with bright silver dimes. Spin the wheel, the young man commanded. The prisoner lifted his shackled hand and gave the wheel a hard spin. A red needle ticked along the edges as it spun, making a cheerful clattering noise, and then slowly the wheel came to a stop. Nina couldn't quite make out the symbol, but the crowd bellowed and the man's shoulders drooped as a guard came forward to unlock his chains. The prisoner cast him aside into the sand, and a second later Nina heard it, a roar that carried even over the excited baying of the crowd. The man in the lion cape and the prison guard stepped hurriedly onto a rope ladder and were lifted out of the pit and onto the safety of the ledge as the prisoner seized a flimsy-looking knife from a bloody bunch of weapons lying in the sand. He backed as far away from the mouth of the tunnel as he could get. Nina had never seen a creature like the one that crawled into view from the tunnel. It was some kind of reptile, its thick body covered in grey-green scales, its head wide and flat, its yellow eyes slitted. It moved slowly, sinuously, its low-slung body sliding lazily over the ground. There was a white crust around the broad crescent of its mouth, and when it opened its jaws to roar again, something white, wet and foaming dripped from its pointed teeth. "What is that thing?" Nina asked. "Rinka morton," said Inej, "a desert lizard. The poison from its mouth is lethal." "It seems pretty slow on its feet." "Yes, it seems that way." The prisoner lunged forwards with its knife. The big lizard moved so quickly, Nina could barely track it. One moment the prisoner was bearing down on it, the next the lizard was on the other side of the arena. Bare seconds later, it had slammed into the prisoner, pinning him onto the ground as he screamed, its poison dripping over his face, leaving smoky trails wherever it touched his skin. The creature dropped its weight onto the prisoner with a sickening crunch and set about slowly mauling his shoulder as he lay there shrieking. The crowd was booing. Nina averted her eyes, unable to watch. "What is this?" "Welcome to the Hell Show," said Kaz. "Pekka Rollins got the idea a few years back and pitched it to the right council member." "The Merchant Council knows." "Of course they know, Nina. There's money to be made here." Nina dug her nails into her palms. That condescending tone made Kaz so slappable. She knew Pekka Rollins' name well. He was the reigning king of the barrel, the owner of not one but 2 gambling palaces, one luxurious, the other catering to sailors, with less to line their pockets, and several of the higher-end brothels. When Nina had arrived to Kestam a year ago, she'd been friendless, penniless, and far from home. She spent the first week in the Kirch law courts dealing with the charges against Matthias, but once her testimony was complete, she'd been unceremoniously dumped at First Harbour with just enough money to book passage back to Ravka. Desperate as she'd been to return to her country, she'd known she could never leave. She couldn't leave Matthias to languish in Hellgate. She had no idea what to do, but it seemed like rumours of the new Grisha Korporalnik in Kestam had already circulated through the city. Pekka Rollins's men had been waiting for her at the harbour with the promise of safety and a place to stay. They'd taken her to the Emerald Palace, where Pekka himself had leaned heavily on Nina to join the dime lines and had offered to set her up in business at the sweet shop. She'd been close to saying yes, desperate for cash and terrified of the slavers who patrolled the streets. But that night, Inez had crawled through her window on the top floor of the Emerald Palace with a proposal from Kaz Brecker in hand. Nina could never figure out how Inez had managed to scale 6 rain-slick stories of stone in the middle of the night, but the drag's terms were far more favourable than those offered by Pekka and the dime lines. It was a contract that she might actually be able to pay off in a year or two if she was smart with her money. And Kaz had sent the right person to argue his case, a silly girl just a few months younger than Nina, who had grown up in Ravka and who had spent a very ugly year indentured at a menagerie. "What can you tell me about Pascal?" Nina had asked that night. "Not much," Inez admitted. "He's no better or worse than most of the bosses in the barrel." "And Kaz Brecker?" "A liar, a thief, and utterly without conscience. But he'll keep to any deal you'll strike with him." Nina had heard the conviction in her voice. "He freed you from the menagerie?" "There's no freedom in the barrel, only good terms. Tant Helene's girls never get to earn out of their contracts. She makes sure they don't. Inez had broken off then, and Nina had sensed the vibrant anger coursing through her. "Kaz convinced Pascal to pay off my indenture. I would have died at the menagerie." "You may still die with the dregs." Inez's dark eyes had glinted. "I may, but I'll die on my feet with my knife in my hand." The next morning, Inez had helped Nina sneak out the Emerald Palace. They'd met with Kaz Brecker, and despite his cold ways and those strange leather gloves, she'd agreed to join the dregs and work out of the White Rose. Less than 2 days later, a girl died at the sweet shop, strangled in her bed by a customer dressed as Mr. Crimson, who was never found. Nina had trusted Inez, and she hadn't been sorry for it, though right now she felt furious with everyone. She watched a group of dime lions prod the desert lizard with long spears. Apparently the monster was sated after its meal and allowed itself to be herded back to this tunnel, its thick body moving side to side in a lazy, sinuous roll. The crowd continued to boo as guards entered the arena to remove the prisoner's remains, tendrils of smoke still curling from his ruined flesh. "Why are they complaining?" Nina asked angrily. "Isn't this what they came for?" "They wanted a fight," said Kaz. "They were expecting him to last longer." "That is disgusting." Kaz shrugged. "Only disgusting thing about that is I didn't think of it first." "These men aren't slaves, Kaz. They're prisoners." "They're murderers and they're rapists. And thieves and con artists. Your people." "Nina, sweet, they aren't forced to fight. They line up for the chance. They earn better food, private sales, liquor, jerda, conjugals with girls from West Ave." Muzzin cracked his knuckles. "Sounds better than we got it at the slat." Nina looked at the people screaming and shouting, the barkers walking at the aisles taking bets. The prisoners of Hellgate might line up for the fight, but Pekka Rollins make the real money. Helvar doesn't fight in the arenas, does he?" "We aren't here for the ambulance," Kaz said. "Beyond slappable. Are you aware that I could waggle my fingers and make you wet your trousers?" "Easy, Heartrender. I like these trousers. And if you start messing with my vital organs, Matthias Helvar will never see sunshine again." Nina blew out a breath and settled for glowering at no one. "Nina," Inez murmured. Don't you start on me. It will all work out. Let Kaz do what he does best. He's horrible, but effective. Being angry at Kaz for being ruthless is like being angry at a stove for being hot. You know what he is. Nina crossed her arms. I'm mad at you too. Me? Why? I don't know just yet. I just am. Inej gave Nina's hand a brief squeeze, and after a moment, Nina squeezed it back. She sat through the next fight in a daze, and the next. She told herself she was ready for this, to see him again, to see him here in this brutal place. After all, she was a Grisha and a soldier of the Second Army. She'd seen worse. But when Matthias emerged from the mouth of the cave below, she knew she'd been wrong. Nina recognised him instantly. Every night the past year, she had fallen asleep thinking of Matthias's face. There was no mistaking the gilded brows, the sharp cut of his cheekbones, but Kaz hadn't lied. Matthias was much changed. The boy who looked back at the crowd with fury in his eyes wasn't a stranger. Nina remembered the first time she'd seen Matthias in a moonlit Kalish wood. His beauty had seemed unfair to her. In another life, she might have believed he was coming to rescue her, a shining saviour with golden hair and eyes the pale blue of northern glaciers. But she'd known the truth of him by the language he spoke and by the disgust on his face every time his eyes lighted on her. Matthias Helvar was Dusko, one of the Fjerdan witch hunters tasked with hunting down Grisha to face trial and execution, though to her he'd always resembled a warrior saint, illuminated in gold. Now he looked what he was truly, a killer. His bare torso seemed hewn from steel, and though she knew it wasn't possible, he seemed bigger, as if the very structure of his body had changed. His skin had been gilded honey, now it was fish belly white beneath the grime, and his hair, he'd had such beautiful hair, thick and golden, worn long in the way of Fjerdan soldiers. Now, like the other prisoners, his head had been shaved, probably to prevent lice. Whichever guard had done it had made a mess of the job. Even from this distance, she could see the cuts and nicks on his scalp, and little strips of blonde stubble in the places the razor had missed. And yet he was beautiful still. He glared at the crowd and gave the wheel a hard spin and nearly knocked it off his face. Tick, 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 tick. Snakes, tiger, bear, boar. The wheel ticked merrily along, then slowed and finally stopped. No, Nina said when she saw where the needle was pointing. It could be worse, said Mazen. Could have landed on the desert lizard again. She grabbed Kaz's arm through his cloak and felt his muscles tense. You have to stop this. Let go, me, Nina. His gravel, rough voice was low, but she sensed a real menace in it. She dropped her hand. Please, you don't understand. If he survives, I'll take Matthias Helvar out of this place tonight, but this part is up to him. Nina gave a frustrated shake of her head. You don't get it. The guard unbolted Matthias's shackles, and as soon as the chains dropped to the sand, he leapt onto the ladder with the announcer to be lifted to safety. The crowd screamed and stamped, but Matthias stood silent, unmoving, even when the gate opened, and even when the wolves charged out of the tunnel. 3 of them snarling and snapping, tumbling over one another to get to him. At the last second, Matthias dropped into a crouch, knocking the first wolf into the dirt, then rolling right to pick up the bloodied knife the previous combatant had left him in the sand. He sprang to his feet, blade held out before him, but Nina could sense his reluctance. His head was cocked to one side, and the look in his blue eyes was pleading, as if he was trying to engage the 2 wolves circling him in some kind of silent negotiation. Whatever the plea might have been, it went unheard. The wolf on the right lunged. Matthias crouched low and spun, lodging the knife into the wolf's belly. It gave a miserable yelp, and Matthias seemed to shudder at the sound. It cost him precious seconds. The 3rd wolf was on him, knocking him to the sand. Its teeth sank into his shoulder. He rolled, taking the wolf with him. The wolf's jaws snapped, and Matthias caught them. He wrenched them apart, the muscles of his arms flexing, his face grim. Nina squeezed her eyes shut. There was a sickening crack. The crowd roared. Matthias kneeled over the wolf, its jaw broken, and it lay on the ground, twitching in pain. He reached for a rock and slammed it hard into the poor animal's skull. It went still, and Matthias's shoulders slumped. The people howled, stomping their feet. Only Nina knew that what this was costing him, that he'd been a Driscoll. Wolves were sacred to his kind, bred for battle like their enormous horses. They were friends and companions, fighting side by side with their Driscoll masters. The first wolf had recovered and was circling. Move, Matthias, she thought desperately. He got to his feet, but his movements were slow, wary. His heart wasn't in this fight. His opponents were grey wolves, rangy and wild, but cousins to the white wolves of the Fjordan north. Matthias had no knife, only the bloody rock in his hand, and the remaining wolf prowled the arena between him and the pile of weapons. The wolf lowered its head and bared its teeth. Matthias drove left. The wolf lunged, sinking its teeth into his side. He grunted and hit the ground hard. For a moment, Nina thought he might simply give in and let the wolf take his life. Then he reached out, hands scrabbling through the sand, searching for something. His fingers closed over the shackles that had bound his wrists. He seized them, looped the chain across the wolf's throat, and pulled, the veins in his neck throbbing from the strain. His bloody face was pressed against the wolf's ruff, his eyes tightly shut, his lips moving. What was he saying? A Driscoll prayer? A farewell? The wolf's hind legs scrabbled at the sand. Its eyes rolled, frightening white showing bright against its matted fur. A high whine rose from its chest, and then it was over. The creature's body stilled. Both fighters lay unmoving in the sand. Matthias kept his eyes closed, his face still buried in the creature's fur. The crowd thundered its approval. The ladder was lowered, and the announcer sprang down, hauling Matthias to his feet and grabbing his wrist to raise his hand in victory. The announcer gave him a little nudge, and Matthias lifted his head. Nina caught her breath. Tears streaked the dirt on Matthias's face. The rage was gone, and it was like some flame had gone out with it. His North Sea eyes were colder than she'd ever seen them, empty of feeling, stripped of anything human at all. This was what Helga had done to him, and it was her fault. The guards took hold of Matthias again, pulling the shackles from the wolf's throat and clamping them back on his wrists. As he was led away, the crowd chanted its disapproval, clamouring, "More, more!" "Where have they taken him?" Nina asked, voice trembling. "To a cell to sleep off the fight," Kaz said. "He will see to his injuries." "They have medics. We'll wait to make sure that he's alone." "I could heal him," she thought, but a darker voice rose in her, rich with mocking. "Not even you can be that foolish, Nina. No healer can cure that boy. You made sure of it." She thought she would leap from her skin as the minutes burned away. The others watched the next fight, Muzzin avidly flexing his fingers and speculating on the outcome, Inez silent and still as a statue, Kaz inscrutable as always, scheming away behind that hideous mask. Nina slowed her own breath, forced her pulse lower, trying to calm herself, but she could do nothing that would mute the riot in her head. Finally, Kaz gave her a nudge. "Ready, Nina? The guard first." She cast a glance at the prison guard standing by the archway. "How down?" It was a barrel turner phrase. "How badly do you want him hurt?" "Shut eye. Knock him out, but don't actually hurt him." They followed Kaz to the arch, through which they'd entered. The rest of the crowd took little notice, eyes focused on the fighting below. "Need your escort?" the guard asked as they approached. "I had a question," said Kaz. Beneath her cape, Nina lifted her hands, sensing the flow of blood in the guard's veins, the tissue of his lungs. "About your mother, and whether the rumours are true." Nina felt the guard's pulse leap and sighed. "Never can make it easy, can you, Kaz?" The guard stepped forward, lifting his gun. "What did you say?" His eyelids drooped. "You don't..." Nina dropped his pulse, and he toppled forwards. Muzzin grabbed him before he could fall as Inej swept him into the cloak Kaz had been wearing just moments before. Nina was only mildly surprised to see that Kaz was wearing a prison guard's uniform beneath it. "Couldn't you have just asked him the time or something?" Nina said. "And where did you get that uniform?" Inej slid the madman's mask down over the guard's face, and Muzzin threw his arm around him, holding him up as if the guard had been drinking too much. They deposited him on one of the benches pressed against the back wall. Kaz tugged on the sleeves of his uniform. "Nina, people love to give up the authority to men in nice clothes. I have uniforms for the Stud Watch, the Harbour Police, and the library of every merch mansion on the Gelstrap. Let's go." They slipped down the passageway. Instead of turning back the way they'd come, they moved counterclockwise around the old tower, the wall of the arena vibrating with voices and stomping feet to their left. The guards posted at each archway paid them little more than a glance, though a few nodded at Kaz, who kept a brisk pace, his face buried in his collar. Nina was so deep in thought that she nearly missed it when Kaz held up a hand for them to slow. They'd rounded a bend between two archways and were in the cover of deep shadow. Ahead of them, a medic was emerging from a cell, accompanied by guards, one carrying a lantern. "He'll sleep through the night," the medic said. "Make sure he drinks something in the morning and check his pupils. I had to give him a powerful sleeping draught." As the men moved off in the opposite direction, Kaz gestured his group forwards. The door in the rock was solid iron, broken only by the narrow slot through which to pass the prisoner meals. Kaz bent into the lock. Nina eyed the crude iron door. "This place is barbaric." "Most of the better fighters sleep in the old tower," Kaz replied. "Keeps them away from the rest of the population." Nina glanced left and right to where the bright lights spilled from the arena arch entryways. There were guards standing in those doorways, distracted maybe, but all one needed to do was turn his head. If they were caught here, would the guards bother giving them over to the Stud Watch for trial, or would they simply force them into the ring to be eaten by a tiger? Maybe something less dignified, she thought bleakly, a swarm of angry voles. It took Kaz a few quick heartbeats to pick the lock. The door creaked open and they slipped inside. The cell was pitch black. A brief moment passed and the cold green glow of a bone light flickered to life beside her. Inej held the little glass sphere aloft. The substance inside was made from the dried and crushed bodies of luminous deep-sea fishes. They were common among crooks in the barrel, who didn't want to get caught in a dark alley, but couldn't be bothered to lug around lanterns. "At least it's clean," Nina thought, as her eyes adjusted to the gloom. Barren and icy cold, but not filthy. She saw a pallet of horse blankets and two buckets placed against the wall, one with a bloody cloth peeking over the rim. This is what the men of Hellgate competed for: a private cell, a blanket, clean water, and a bucket for waste. Matthias slept with his back to the wall. Even in the dim illumination of the bone light, she could see his face was starting to swell. Some kind of ointment had been smeared over his wounds. Calendula. She recognised the smell. Nina moved towards him, but Kaz stopped her with a hand on her arm. "Let Inej assess the damage." Nina began. "I need you to work on Muzzin." Inej tossed Kaz the crow-headed cane she must have been hiding beneath a great imp costume and kneeled over Matthias's body with the bone light. Muzzin stepped forwards. He removed his cloak and shirt and the madman's mask. His head was shaved and he wore prison-issue trousers. Nina looked at Matthias and back to Muzzin, grasping what Kaz had in mind. The two boys were about the same height and the same build, but that's where the similarities ended. "You can't possibly mean for Muzzin to take Matthias's place." "He isn't here for a sparkling conversation," Kaz replied. "You'll need to reproduce Helvar's injuries. Inej, what's the inventory?" "Bruised knuckles, chipped tooth, 2 broken ribs," Inej said. "Third and fourth on the left." "His left or your left?" Kaz asked. "His left." "This isn't going to work," Nina said in frustration. "I can match the damage to Helvar's body, but I'm not a good enough tailor to make Muzzin look like him." "Just trust me, Nina." "I wouldn't trust you to try my shoes without stealing the laces, Kaz." She peered at Muzzin's face. Even if I swell him up, he'll never pass. Tonight, Matthias Helver, or rather our dear Muzzin, is going to appear to contract firepox, the lupine strain, carried by wolves and dogs alike. Tomorrow morning, when the guys discover him so covered in pustules that he is unrecognisable, he'll be quarantined for a month to see if he survives the fever and to outweigh the contagion. Meanwhile, Matthias will be with us. Get it? You want me to make Muzzin look like he has firepox? Yes, and do it quickly, Nina, because in about 10 minutes things are going to get very hectic around here. Nina stared at him. What was Kaz planning? No matter what I do to him, it won't last a month. I can't give him a permanent fever. My contract in the infirmary will make sure he stays sick enough. We just need to get him through a diagnosis. Now get to work. Nina looked Muzzin up and down. This is going to hurt you just as much as if you'd been in the fight yourself, she warned. He scrunched up his face, bracing for the pain. I could take it. She rolled her eyes, then lifted her hands, concentrating. With a sharp slice of her right hand over her left, she snapped Muzzin's ribs. He let out a grunt and doubled over. That's a good boy, said Kaz, taking it like a champion. Knuckles next, then the face. Nina spread bruises and cuts all over Muzzin's knuckles and arms, matching the wounds to Inej's descriptions. I've never seen firepox up close, Nina said. She was only familiar with the illustration from books they'd used in their anatomy training at the Little Palace. Count yourself lucky, Kaz said grimly. Hurry up. She worked from memory, swelling and cracking the skin over on Muzzin's face and chest, raising blisters until the swellings and pustules were so bad that he was truly unrecognisable. The big man moaned. Why would you agree to do this? She murmured. The swollen flesh of Muzzin's face quivered, and Nina thought he might be trying to smile. Money was good, he said quickly. She sighed. Why does anyone do anything in the barrel? Good enough to get locked up in Hellgate. Kaz tapped his cane on the cell floor. Stop making trouble, Nina. If Helvar cooperates, he and Muzzin will both have their freedom just as soon as the job's done. And if he doesn't? Then Helvar gets locked back in his cell and Muzzin still gets paid. And I'll take him to breakfast at the Cooperon. Can I have waffles? Muzzin mumbled. We'll have all the waffles and whiskey. And if this job doesn't come off, no one's going to want to be around me sober. Finish, Nina? Nina nodded, and the nurse took her place to bandage Muzzin to look like Matthias. All right, said Kaz, get Helvar on his feet. Nina crouched beside Matthias as Kaz stood over her with the bone light. Even in sleep, Matthias's features were troubled and his pale brows furrowed. She let her hands travel over the bruised line of his jaw, resisting the urge to linger there. Not the face, Nina. I need him mobile, not pretty. Heal him fast and only enough to get him walking for now. I don't want him spry enough to vex us over. Nina lowered the blanket and went to work. Just another body, she told herself. She was getting late-night calls from Kaz to heal wounded members of the Dregs who he didn't want to bring around to any legitimate medic. Girls with stabbing punctures, boys with broken legs or bullets lodged inside them, victims of a scuffle with a stab watch of another gang. Pretend it's Muzzin, she told herself, or Big Bollinger, or some overfool. You don't know this boy. And it was true. The boy she knew might have been the scaffold, but something new had been built upon it. She touched his shoulder gently. Helvar, she said. He didn't stir. Matthias. A lump rose in her throat, and she felt the ache of tears threatening. She pressed a kiss to his temple. She knew that Kaz and the others were watching, and that she was making an idiot of herself. But after so long, he was finally here, in front of her, and so very broken. Matthias, she repeated. Nina? His voice was raw, but as lovely as she'd remembered. Oh, saints, Matthias, she whispered. Please wake up. His eyes opened, groggily, palest blue. Nina, he said softly. His knuckles brushed her cheeks. His rough hand cupped her face tentatively, disbelieving. Nina? Her eyes filled with tears. Shh, Matthias, we're here to get you out. Before she could blink, he had a hold of her shoulders and her pinned her to the ground. Nina! he growled. Then his hands closed over her throat. And that was the end of chapter 6, titled Nina, and chapter 7 is titled Matthias. So I'm sure that we'll be focusing on him next. So yeah, thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this chapter, and I will see you again next week. So stay safe, and we will see you soon.